Front Page Live is meant to give people an opportunity to trust what they're reading and what they're seeing. It is a progressive, liberal orientation, but that does not mean that there is not information here that will value every single voter, everybody who cares about what's going on in America, and finds it a little bit distressing that we are more divided than we ever have been, well, not ever, but in recent memory, and that we are facing serious, serious problems that cannot be solved unless we can talk to one another and work together. Our government has been in shutdown mode way too long. Not just in the literal sense of a government shutdown, but that there has been gridlock in Congress, there's been gridlock between the three branches of government, and it's getting worse by the day because the President of the United States does not really know how the wheels of government can be turned unless he's breaking the axles. I mean, if part of what we're doing can be somewhat compared or contrasted to the Drudge Report. We are putting out aggregated, known, trending, viral stories that come from legitimate, fact-based, verifying journalistic organizations. That's really important, and it's also quick. You'll know that what you're seeing on Front Page Live is already getting lots of eyeballs around the world, and you'll know that we're keeping an eye on making sure that this stuff is fact. Now, if we put up an article that ends up being changed or the facts changed, we'll adjust, right? But this is not about making things up to suit a bias. And a big part of Joe Rohn, our co-founder of all of this, is a really important voice in climate change. And he's written a lot about the science, right? Science is science. It's fact-based. Political science is not. It's often based on deciphering truth from lies first. And there's a big, big difference. And there's way too much opinion passing as fact across the media, whether it's the internet, television, talk radio, all of it. The left has been at a disadvantage. There's more conservative talk radio than there is liberal talk radio. There's more conservative web pages than there are liberal web pages. Across the board, the right has been far more aggressive at the business of pushing a message. Democrats have a very powerful positive policy message. Well, when Fox started, Rupert Murdoch hired a man named Joe Paranen, who'd been the president of CBS News and the bureau chief in Washington, D.C. for quite some time. And Joe Paranen hired a woman named Emily Rooney, who happened to be the daughter of Andy Rooney of 60 Minutes fame. And they launched the network. And it was the first one of three times. It took 3 times, and they were the ones who put it together and hired me and Shepard Smith, who's still there, and Eric Shawn, who's still there, and 1 or 2 other reporters who moved on very early during the launch period. And Fox launched in the fall of 1996, which was the Bill Clinton re-election and the Bob Dole, Republican leader of the Senate, who gave up his seat in the Senate, not just the leadership of the Senate, but gave up his seat in order to complete that race and lose. And that was my first run with Fox. And after the end of that election, rather than going back to the TV station that I'd been working at in New Hampshire, I moved down to Washington and then chased all the candidates from that point forward. And initially, Fair and Balanced, and We Report, You Decide, was really very, very seriously put on the screen at Fox News Channel. If a pundit or an opinion person came on the screen, it would say, so-and-so is from the Brookings Institute, or is from Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood is an X, and this is a right-leaning or a left-leaning organization, so that it would all be out there. And it was really very, very responsible, more so than others had been. And at the same time we launched, so did MSNBC. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. I thought seeing Bill Clinton, a governor of Arkansas, who didn't win in Iowa and didn't win in New Hampshire in terms of the primaries, would unseat a sitting president. I thought that was astonishing, that George H.W. Bush would not have won a second term. And it's a very rare occurrence in American politics that a president does not win a second term. And then I thought I'd seen it all when Bill Clinton got impeached in '98. And then I thought I'd seen it all in 2000 when we had a recount that was decided by the Supreme Court. And then came 2001 with the 9/11 attacks. And then we had the 2008 election of the first black president. And there was the Iraq War along the way with weapons of mass destruction, and I thought that was the biggest lie that I'd ever heard in my life. And by the time 2016 rolled around, we had a candidate who claimed he'd never run for office and never been a politician before, which was a lie. He ran in '88 and 2000. And he said he was the greatest businessman in the world, which we know is a lie because he's the biggest guy writing down more debt and more losses than any other businessman in American history. So at that point, I'd seen enough. Well, there's no question about it that the entertainment hosts in prime time are pushing Republican, right, conservative agendas, and often doing it with falsehoods and misinformation and inaccurate information. The news division still has legitimate journalists there who try to tell the story straight, but there's a huge imbalance. There is far more opinion and talk than there are facts and news. There's a constant tension. There's a constant tension in every newsroom that's attached to a business that involves entertainment, and it exists at Fox. It exists at ABC News and CBS. It's difficult. It's a difficult thing to keep straight. And when I was there, I had my differences, and I said so on the air. You know, I mean, it was fairly obvious. I was not often invited onto Sean Hannity's show until Trump was the candidate. And it was pretty obvious on the air that Sean and I didn't agree on a lot of what was going on the air. And that was just, you know, part of the game. He's opinion. I was news. Yeah. Well, as we talked earlier about sort of the access that voters and reporters get to presidential candidates in New Hampshire, and the arrogance of the people who think that because they get to vote in New Hampshire and the candidates don't, that they actually still have the power. Vastly different when you talk about journalistic access at the White House with an occupant of that building. And all you need to know about how dangerous access can be is what led us into war in Iraq over weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. Because one reporter at the New York Times had access to the Vice President of the United States, and the Vice President of the United States said things that were not true, but she had an obligation to report them anyway because they were coming from the Vice President. Even though he was not named as a source, that got past the editorial hoops because she was able to tell her bosses that, look, this is coming from the VP, and the sources were kept quiet.